Welcome to Middle Fingers Up, the show where we hold our heads high and our middle fingers higher. I'm your host, Kieran McKay. The holiday season can be a hard time for many people. This episode is about understanding the various experiences some people around us may be going through. Sharing the mic today with Provisional Psychologist Nevena Kalajdzic. Nevena works with people of all ages and backgrounds. However, she is particularly passionate about working with families and strengthening interpersonal relationships. I'm very appreciative to have Nevena's knowledge and understanding in the studio today because many people feel the pressure to hide how they may be feeling during this time. So both our hope for today's talk is to help those of us that look forward to the holidays, maybe learn a little bit about why others may not feel the same. And for those of us that may experience the struggle to keep up with the cheerful energy, perhaps this will help gain some insight or some validation about what might be causing these thoughts, feelings, and sensations. So I'm just going to welcome Nevena to the show. Welcome, Nev. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I am very excited to have you. I think we had this sort of organic conversation not even a week ago about the holidays and what they can bring for people, and with your background and knowledge, as well as some of the work that we got to do back in the day together. I think we're a little sensitive to what the holiday time can be like. So I'm really glad that it didn't take much time for you to make this a priority and come today. I know you have a bit of a schedule, so I really appreciate having you here and having this conversation, and hopefully people can take something from this.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited that we have an opportunity to talk about this because maybe it's not as simple as the Hallmark movies tell us.
Yeah.
So definitely something important to talk about.
Yeah. So why don't we just jump right into the Middle Fingers Up segment? So I hope you have been listening to the episodes because here's where I ask my guests to share something that they want to put their middle fingers up to, get off their chest. So I'm very curious to hear what you have.
Well, I just learned this week that this cold that we're having in Calgary is actually wind, weather system, whatever. Clearly, I know weather very well. Coming in from Siberia.
Oh,
and this makes a lot of sense because we are experiencing what feels like minus 42 as we speak.
Yes.
Minus 42 degrees Celsius is not something I'm comfortable with.
No,
so my middle finger is all the way up to the frigid Siberian air.
Yeah.
I'm not into it. It can leave tomorrow.
Yes.
Like now, yesterday. Really.
It so can. You know, it's really bad. Like our houses can't even heat properly. I think our heater is going to give any second. So that's going to suck when that happens. But Carrie sent me this funny video, and it was from, I don't know if you know that Canadian show, This Hour Has 22 Minutes. It was around years ago. Fun comedians like Norm Macdonald was on it. And so there's this funny skit where it's this like couple sitting by the fire, and they're like looking at the forecast, and they're like the 5-day forecast, and they're like, oh, honey, it's like minus 15 today and minus 20 and minus blah, blah. But in 5 days, it'll be plus 1. So then they have this hope all week. They're like, okay, we're going to work towards it. And then Friday rolls around, and 5 days later, whenever that is, and it's like not plus 1, it's minus 15. And they're like, oh, it's still cold. But what's it like tomorrow? Oh, don't worry. In 3 days, it'll be plus 1. And then the camera goes to like the people at the weather network, and they're like, we just say that to people to keep the hope coming. We have no idea what the weather's like in 5 days. But that's exactly what Carrie and I have been doing. We've been looking at the weather, and we're like, oh, when's it going to be plus something? And isn't it crazy that we live in this part of the world where we say plus and minus with temperature?
Right. And it's supposed to be plus Monday, but this is exactly what's going to happen. I fear that they wrote plus 4 on Monday.
Exactly. There you go.
If it's minus 32 right now, I have a hard time imagining that we'll get into plus by Monday.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see how that goes this weekend. So that's a good one. I appreciate that you shared that. I have a middle finger I have a middle finger. I have two, actually. I like to put my middle fingers up to fishy crackers. You know, goldfish crackers?
Yes. Your favorite.
Well,
some of
my, yes, but some of the people in my house would say that's like, you know, their favorite. And I like don't know what it is with these fishy crackers, but I feel like my kids are planting this sick game where they're playing this endless game of scavenger hunt, and there's like no prize at the end, where I keep finding these friggin' fishy crackers throughout the house. So they're like on the floor, and they're all over the counter, and they're one the other day I found like in the bathroom. I'm like, why is there a friggin' fishy cracker smiling at me in the bathroom? So I, you know, this morning found one in the sink, and I asked my son finally and was like, "Okay, Xander, like, are you guys doing this on purpose?" And he burst out. He thought that was so funny. So now I have a feeling they're going to start
snacking
this
everywhere.
Yeah. And you know, like, it's like even in what's that story, Hansel and Gretel, like at least in there, even there's, I guess it's the witch and she eats them, but at least there's something that they get to like work towards. I have literally nothing. I'm like, why do I keep finding these? It's just me having to clean them up.
They're leaving crumbs. Well, did you try tracking them? Like to see if the traces.
There's the psychologist. What are the patterns and the trends? Yeah. Look at that. Does that part of the brain does it ever shut off?
No.
I should ask your husband this. Does the psychologist brain ever shut off? Like, let's unpack this.
Yeah. We'll save that for therapy or something.
Yeah. I probably owe you so much with indirect friendship therapy that you do all the time. So I thank you for the friendship therapy.
Hey, you know.
Yeah.
Comes with the job, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. That's right. If you're going to be a therapist and you're going to have friends, that's kind of on you. That's your problem, because you're going to therapize all of us. And, you know, we can't, some of us, you know.
I try not to. That's not true. That's not true. I try not to.
It's true. We make you. It's like when you have a doctor friend and you're like, hey, can you look at this thing over here on my arm? Yeah. And it's like, whoa. When we were out for drinks, why are you showing me this part of your body? So yeah, I hear you. Okay, well, let's thank you. Let's get into it. I appreciate, again, you being here. And so according to the famous holiday song, it's the most wonderful time of the year. Would you say that that's true for everyone, Nev?
I mean, absolutely not. For sure, it can be a really exciting time. It can bring a lot of joy, bring a lot of connection. Mm-hmm. It can also be a time, though, where we're feeling increased stress. At best, I would say most people will have some increased stress around this time.
Yeah.
And then at worst, it might be a really, really difficult time or the hardest time for somebody. And so there's a wide spectrum in there. You know, it's really not as simple as it's all roses and what's the expression? Man.
Oh, you're asking the wrong person. I'm so bad. You know me. Yeah, we're both like... Well, I'm first generation. You weren't even born in North America, not, so I don't even have an excuse.
I'm gonna try not to use expressions.
Yeah.
We'll go with it's not.
The grass is always greener.
It's not all wonderful all the time.
Yeah.
It can be wonderful, but there's room for the other experiences too, and some of them can be really difficult.
And so I appreciate you saying that. Like for me, Christmas and this holiday time, usually is a good time. Usually I'm excited about it. And I think with my children, it's made it a little bit more exciting over the years because you're kind of seeing it through their eyes. But also, you know, not even I have household members, let alone family and friends that don't experience it in the same way. And so I've been thinking a lot about them lately and, am I putting too much out there because I have this energy of let's listen to Christmas songs today all day. And I have, you know, people in the house or people that I'm visiting with that maybe aren't feeling that way. And so can you maybe help me understand a little bit of like what are some reasons that maybe people might be struggling at this time of year?
I mean, there are so many different factors that come into play when it comes to holidays. We might be worried about how we're going to manage our time when it comes to work, when it comes to kids being off school. We might have concerns around gifts and all the financial strain that comes with the holidays.
Yeah.
We might be dealing with grief and loss and experiencing some really big feelings that don't really go well with all the immense joy of Christmas songs and you know, holiday decorations everywhere.
Yeah.
There's so many different reasons that people might be having a hard time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think often what we see is, social media out in the community and stores and all around us is this idea of holiday cheer, a lot of excitement. But it really, there's complexity to it.
Yeah.
And we need to kind of create space for both.
Yeah.
Right? We can have joy and also know that some people might be having a really, really hard time.
I appreciate that because as you talk about when you go into the stores and you're listening to music, I know there's radio stations here in Calgary where they've been playing Christmas music since November 1st.
For sure. As soon as Halloween passes, we're into holiday season.
And I think you're being generous because if you even think back in August, there's Halloween stuff that comes out in the beginning of summer, but then the Christmas stuff comes out in the summer. And I never really thought of it that way. I always saw the Christmas stuff and was mad about it too, because it's and that makes sense because I'm I'm just wanting to enjoy summer right now and enjoy this time. I don't want to start thinking about that yet. But if Christmas or this time of year was maybe more complicated than that for me in the way you're saying, then you're faced with that months ahead.
Right.
And so I can imagine if from August, September, October, November, all we're doing is talking about this and you're seeing it everywhere and you're hearing it everywhere, then those feelings and those thoughts, and I know you even mentioned it's also sensations. It's not just thoughts and feelings. There's all sorts of different experiences that come about. So it's almost maybe some people are busting at the seams in some ways because how are you containing that and keeping that in still?
Absolutely. And then when there's a buildup of, a few weeks, but even what you're saying, it could be 2-3 months. It can kind of feel like a bit of a pressure cooker situation where your anxiety might slowly start rising in, let's say, November.
Yeah.
And by the time, end of December rolls around and we're having a bunch of gatherings and celebrations, it can be really hard to feel like you're going to have a great time.
Yeah.
This buildup, sometimes we also build up some unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
We end up getting stuck in all kinds of trouble. Sometimes it's financial debt, for example,
right.
or just really uncomfortable interactions with our family members. All kinds of stuff can come up. And when you are experiencing this for an extended period of time and this buildup, it's not surprising when somebody has a meltdown. How many times do we see those holiday videos where somebody just had a full-on blowout in the middle of a family dinner or something?
Yeah.
And it's are we shocked that somebody would have a full-on breakdown when they've had 2 months of rising anxiety that might peak in the midst of kind of worse
totally
environment that you're not prepared to manage?
Oh, when you describe it that way, honestly, it makes me think of my household in the last few days, building up to Christmas, just in the eyes of my 11 and 9-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
They love Christmas. They are so excited about it. And yet this, from Sunday till today, it has been really my kids are so excited, but it's coming out in loud screaming and loud noises, and they have all this pent up energy, and no amount of sending them out to shovel is helping calm it. And then that loud, exciting energy turns into some kind of fight and argument, and they're tired. They're not sleeping. And so it's this sucks because by the time Christmas rolls around, I bet you one of them is going to have a cold or something like that because the excitement is turning into this stress. And that is speaking of kids that are looking forward to it. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes kids are a really good example of what might be happening to us as adults. It's harder to justify as an adult that I feel screaming at the top of my lungs in the way that yesterday, my 9-year-old during supper laid on the kitchen floor, which when you talk about sensations, I wonder because it's very cool. Mm-hmm. So I also wonder if that was cooling him down. Mm-hmm. And he planned it that way, but he was laying on the floor, laughing for 3 minutes straight, to the point where he started coughing. And I don't even think he had anything to laugh, but he had all this energy where he just burst into laughing. And my older son and I are okay, are you okay, buddy? Yeah. And I thought of that, and I thought of us talking today, and I was like, oh my God, this has to be the kid version of what we're talking about for adults.
Yeah, exactly. And for some children, especially younger children, they might feel more free to express it when they also don't know how to express it a certain way. They might express it in a way like laying on the floor and just laughing uncontrollably. And for him, that was, a way to get that energy out and maybe regulate his nervous system.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily a bad thing either,
right?
Because we have to do it somehow. But you can imagine, like you said, adults, oftentimes we're holding that inside.
Yeah.
We're not just going to roll on the ground and have a moment like that. So, or it's unlikely.
Yeah. Someone might ask you.
I mean, can you blame them though? But we hold on to that. And so absolutely, as you talk about, getting sick and things like that, that increased stress might have so many physical effects on us, including, weakened immune system, getting sick, picking up all the colds and things that are going around right now.
Right.
And don't even get me started on overlaying the COVID pandemic on top of this, right?
Yeah. That's another layer.
Not even to include that too much in today's conversation, but really there's so many different stressors happening for all of us.
Yeah.
And so increased stress is a real thing during this time.
Yeah. I'm wondering, like, what about, okay, so you sort of talked about Christmas songs and you talked about decorations in stores and, this heightened anxiety in some ways is what you're talking about. So what are some signs that somebody could recognize in themselves? And I guess I'm asking this because I just want to shift for a second and talk about maybe there's folks out there that don't realize they have these heightened emotions or sensations or feelings occurring. Like, again, I never mean to compare a child to an adult to child, but sometimes our behaviors are so similar, like the meaning of our behavior is so similar, but just exhibited different. So for my 9-year-old who's laying there crying or laughing in that sense, and then you think of an adult, like he didn't know that maybe he's worked up because he can hardly take the fact that Christmas is coming. He's just worked up. And so how would, as an adult, how would I be able to recognize that maybe I'm experiencing something that like a 9-year-old on the floor is, that I have all this energy, or I'm maybe really short or really, anxious, and it's coming out by being abrupt and upset, or, there's all sorts of different ways that anxiety can look. And so what are some things people can maybe pay attention to build that awareness in themselves if they are having a hard time?
Well, I think a good place to start is tuning into your body, right? Our body tells us a lot about how we're doing. And oftentimes, and I would say especially for adults, we're disconnected from how we're feeling and what we're experiencing in our body. So a good example of that might be something like, maybe you're actually have a heightened blood pressure. Maybe you're having more like an increased heart rate. Maybe you're experiencing chest pain. Maybe you're experiencing muscle tension, fatigue. You might be having digestive issues, like people with, let's say, something like IBS.
Yes.
Those symptoms of those things can worsen during the holidays because of the intensity of everything that's going on around us.
Yes.
And so from physical symptoms to, of course, psychological symptoms that are sometimes hard to make sense of. So we might be feeling really low. Everybody's telling us we're supposed to be merry and jolly, and we might actually be feeling low. We might be feeling hopeless. We might be feeling frustrated. You had already mentioned like irritability. I mean, that could be just a small sign, right? Of how many fights do we get into around holidays as opposed to, a couple months prior.
Right.
Because we might be kind of on edge.
Yeah.
We might not have the same amount of patience for others, for our kids.
Yeah.
There's all of these pieces that can play a role. Feeling just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Maybe that you might have deadlines at work. And so the sense of overwhelm, not being able to stay on top of your schedules.
Well, and then you talk about work, like some people don't even get to take time off.
Absolutely.
So that's an added, as you're talking, I'm like, oh my God, you're right. Like the list can just you could be listing off so many things. Like I get time off, but you don't get time. And yet we're all supposed to be meeting up and celebrating and spending all this money, partying or whatever it is we do during the holidays. And I don't even have the ability to do that. So that and I have to work, like there's people that are like, well, I can get time off, but I have to work.
Right.
If I take this time off, I'm going to lose out. And so when you talk about it in that way, you're like, yeah, like there's so many things. And I appreciate what you're saying is like the level of awareness is okay. How can I be attuned to what's going on for me and kind of helping be present in the moment. Like what, and sometimes if you do a workout, they'll say, do a body scan right now. Like what is this, lifting this weight too much for your body? What's it doing? Because only you know what it's doing for you. So it's almost like doing a body scan.
Yeah, absolutely. And we have to be able to slow down and check in with ourselves.
Yeah.
Other people around us might do that, like check in with us.
Yeah.
But we can't expect or rely on others to be able to, manage our feelings. We have to be able to check in with ourselves. Another like good example of signs, I guess, that people might notice is they might notice themselves pulling back more from others and spending, more time on their phone or more time watching TV or more time in their work.
Yeah. Because
that's what we normally do when we're avoiding some of these experiences and some of these uncomfortable feelings we're having. And so it might be as simple as I'm just going to, doom scroll for 3 hours on social media because I don't want to think about having to, I don't know, clean my house and prepare for this big Christmas dinner that I'm hosting.
Yeah.
That's a lot. It's a lot to take in. So you might find all these little strategies, which can be helpful in the moment.
Yeah.
But it ends up kind of in avoidance at times when it's in excess.
Right.
And it's a way to escape all of those uncomfortable feelings. So we have to slow down and check in with ourselves and see where we're at.
That's well said. I appreciate that. You were saying something about schedules. I think like these tight schedules where there's all these events and things to go to. And, I had said something about us needing to work and all that. And you talked about, people start to pull back sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I think, that can be a bad thing, maybe looked at as a bad thing in some ways. And I also have seen it recently where I was actually quite inspired by my friend Mina, who was visiting, Mina, she's actually going to be on episode 7. Nice. And actually she talks a lot about her IBS. It's very interesting you brought it up because in that episode, she had mentioned how dinner parties and even like during the holidays is so stressful. Absolutely. Because you can only eat and you don't want to be the person that's like, please don't tend to my dietary, because everybody has dietary restrictions. And so everyone tries to not tell anyone their stuff. But we did a recording. We recorded that episode that's coming out, and we were supposed to go that evening out for dinner. And the episode is very heavy duty in my perspective. We shared a lot of personal experiences. Mm-hmm. And so she, in the afternoon, was like, I think I'm not going to come out tonight to this family dinner. And it was very last minute. And, I was like, okay, like, that's your choice. Like you're an adult. I can't make you. Right. And part of me kind of didn't want to go either because I was exhausted too. And so I understood what she was saying. And so she was like, yeah, I'm just like, I'm going to just chill back at your place and I'll see you when you get back. And so we came back from dinner and later on we talked about this. And she said, as I'm getting older, I'm recognizing that I always feel like I have to stuff so much in my day to day because I feel guilty. I feel obligated. I feel like, well, I'm here. I should go do this. And what that actually does is it takes from the next day and the next day and the next day. So I'm really running in a deficit. Like I'm running, with no fuel. And, she said the following day, Saturday, we have really big plans and I really want to be present for that. So this is why I opted out of this evening. Mm-hmm. And I just really appreciated hearing a grown-ass woman tell me about how she manages transitions in her life and how she's accepted that if she doesn't do that, put up that boundary, that's going to impact, that would have impacted her that night and whatever. And because we don't do that, we feel obligated.
That's right. And that's a beautiful example of somebody checking in with themselves, seeing what it is that they need, and then setting boundaries for what they're able to do and what they can commit to.
Right.
And it's so funny that we get sucked into this idea of like taking that personally. Like, let's say, you're the one hosting and somebody says, no, I'm not coming. Yeah. I'm not interested, but I'm not able to come. Yeah. We often take it personally.
Right.
We often kind of default to judgment or criticism of that person.
Yeah.
Maybe they're being, you think, oh, they're being selfish or this way, that way. But really, we need to normalize the idea that setting boundaries and being able to express what we need is absolutely necessary. We cannot commit, especially like you said, with so many different events happening, we cannot commit and be there for everything.
Yeah.
And as we talk about this too, I think of that movie 4 Christmases.
Oh, we just watched, that's one of my top 3 favorite Christmas movies.
What a great example.
Such a good one. Yes.
Having parents who are split up.
Yes.
You're like, I'm not doing any of these. I'm going on holiday and on like vacation, right? Somewhere warm. And then having to attend 4 different Christmas events, because this is a good example for blended families, for families who aren't together and who will have multiple events planned, and you are expected to attend every one of them.
That's right.
And people will take offense if you don't.
Totally.
That's so hard. Like, why? Why do we do that?
Yeah. Well, it's a good, because I see both sides. I see as well, I want to spend this tradition with you. I love you. I care for you. So I see that side of why people personalize it, because you just don't want to, it's something I've done. And yet I also see the other side of it. It doesn't make me a good person, or it doesn't help me. It makes it harder for me. And there's all sorts of reasons. Like you had even mentioned before when, we were kind of going back and forth preparing for this, that we have to take into account that people that attend, let's say like that 4 Christmases movie, there could be a family member or somebody present at that event that is a direct connection to an abuse that you've suffered. So you're like, when you had mentioned that to me, I'm like, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. We might be around people like coming to, especially family events or big gatherings where there's a lot of family and maybe family friends.
Yeah.
You might be exposed to people who you've had really awful experiences with, whether that's emotional abuse, whether that's physical abuse, sexual abuse. There might be unresolved feelings, conversations that haven't been had, and a lot of wounds that are left over. And sometimes in families, depending on where we come from, we might have a tendency to, sweep things under the rug. We don't talk about it. We don't bring it up. But when you have to show up and there's a person there who's an absolute, I want to say trigger. I try to avoid that sometimes, but it is a trigger. It's a trigger to see somebody who has maybe harmed you in the past in some way. And you, again, might have some really big feelings come up around that. And that can be so, so stressful. So I think one thing I think about when we are determining whether or not we should be attending all of these events, whether we need to attend all 4 Christmases. My question is, at what cost? What is it going to cost you in your mental health or your physical health or your, just general well-being? What might it cost you? Are you able to? Sometimes we have to make accommodations. Sometimes we will push through, right? And I'm not saying that's just the reality of it. I mean, ideally we wouldn't have to, but that's not the world we live in. Sometimes we'll show up anyways, right? For those other people, to show that we care, that we love them, that we're there for them. We'll gather all our energy and show up, right?
Well, especially if it's a work event where you kind of have no choice.
Absolutely.
If you don't, and I even like, I appreciate what you're saying, because when you talk about pushing through, I think we're going to come back to this in a little bit too. Like what does that actually do for us? And I mean, maybe we can go there now. Why come back to it? Why not go there? So like what I'm hearing a lot about today is that not everyone shares the same feelings with the holidays. So some people look forward to it and some people dread it. And that dread means all sorts of things. That might be about anxiety, abuse, and everything in between. And so while I guess like how maybe I might love the season and that's great, it's also okay that my family member, household members, or my neighbor, whoever, doesn't have the same experiences. So, and you talked about like, how do we have both perspectives and be okay with that? And so I think you're talking a lot about today how to have an awareness and understanding of our surroundings. So how can I, on one hand, as someone who maybe has a hard time during this time of year, start to pay attention to some patterns and signs that can help me set some boundaries like Mina did? And how can someone like me who really enjoys this time of year have an awareness that not everybody does, and it's really not personal. I don't have to make it about me. It's okay that my friend or family member isn't able to make it. This is better for them because they're looking at what cost. So I have to respect that.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's not, I mean, as easy as that, but that's the hope as we're talking about today. Like, how do we share these different perspectives? And so because there are different perspectives and people can feel isolated. So because some people's reason for struggling to attend a holiday event might be seeing their trigger. For some, it could be, as you mentioned, work-related issues and all these sorts of things. So everybody starts to feel like their perspective or their experience is unique, and because there's so many of them. And I think sometimes that can lead to isolation. So I think that sometimes the folks that really don't feel that they have the space to be upfront and honest about how they're doing, or don't even recognize that maybe they could use that kind of a conversation, they tend to put things away, tuck them away. And I would say, like, there's that metaphorical rug. We keep tucking it under. And so what can that do for someone's mental well-being when you're constantly feeling like you can't say anything to anyone and it's causing more isolation for you? What can that do for your well-being? How does that impact you?
I mean, for people who experience a lot of isolation around this time, it's going to likely mean increased anxiety and lower mood, depressed mood maybe. It can be really, really difficult. And if you think about even this idea of isolation, like, it's not necessarily something that happens to us. Sometimes we kind of pull back and isolate ourselves from others in order to protect ourselves, to whether it's to shield our heart or to just give ourselves a break. But when I think about isolation too, I think there are people out there who will pull back because they don't want to maybe be a burden. They don't want to be that, like, negative Nancy or the Grinch, right? We talked about this a little bit before, where there's this idea of, well, if you're not as excited and happy about these holidays, you're kind of like the Grinch or Scrooge. And that can be really isolating, because you're telling that person, your mood, if you're not so happy or you're not so excited, you're ruining it for the rest of us. And It's not okay. You're not supposed to be that way. Yeah. And that in itself can be isolating. And then sometimes, like I said, we pull back and we isolate ourselves because we're thinking, I don't want to be a burden. I don't want to bother people. Sometimes even going back to the gift giving, like, if you're financially not in a position where you're going to be able to buy all the gifts that you're wanting to, or maybe are expected to.
Or someone's done for you.
Or to return the favor, right?
Yeah.
You're going to then be like, oh, well, maybe I won't go to that Christmas party, or I won't go to that event because I can't show up in the way that I want to, right? And what's expected of me. And so there can be almost like, again, a pile up of all these feelings for somebody and how they're thinking about it. And they end up feeling really alone. Yeah. And that's devastating. I mean, especially during a time like this where we're supposed to be connecting with others. And ideally, working to kind of recharge, rejuvenate, have some quality time. But it can be really, really devastating for those who are isolated, or don't feel like they have somebody to reach out to, or can't speak openly.
So for those people, okay, so it makes me think about, we recently did a toxic, kind of like, what does it mean to be a man, toxic masculinity sort of man episode. And I had those 3 guests back on again recently to do another part because we received a lot of good feedback about having men's perspective on. And when we got back together in the room and we had this conversation about growth and ego, and the guys talked a lot about how they feel this pressure of being relied on to provide. They're the providers. So like, even at a time during the holidays, if they are the sole provider, where are we going to get the money? It's kind of on them in some ways. And whether that's the reality of their situation in the home, that's how they feel. So I think sometimes we are jumped to say, well, that's not the way it really is. But that is for them. That's their experience. That's their experience. Exactly. And so the guys are saying in this episode coming up that they don't even feel like there's space in their own households and to talk about the feelings, because as a man, you're not supposed to talk about those. You're not supposed to have those. You're supposed to, as they say, suck it up, princess. And so I'm just thinking of this recent conversation I had with them and linking it to what you're saying now. And like, that's a pretty risky place of feeling like I don't have the space to be able to tell you how I'm really feeling. The holidays are tough. I'm having a hard time. And like, what can those feelings lead to?
Well, I know we certainly know that men struggle with mental health in a bit of a different way, and that there can be still a lot of stigma in expressing feelings. Our society still, assumes that women are the ones that get to be more expressive and talk about how they're feeling, and men don't always have the room for that.
Yeah.
It also makes me think about this recent tragedy with Twitch,
Steven,
Twitch boss, taking his life, and it's a really good example around how men's health, and I'm going to also say how Black men specifically, and Indigenous men, people of color in general, that can be an even bigger struggle because there's a number of issues related to, being disproportionately affected by exposure to violence, not having mental health resources, having the mental health stigma, all of those different pieces that we can talk about in a whole separate thing, how that plays out in terms of men's health and how, this was obviously it's awful, but it's such a good conversation around somebody can present as very happy, positive, bubbly, and still be experiencing really deep feelings of hopelessness or sadness or loneliness. I mean, I can't speak to what Twitch was going through. Obviously, we don't know.
However, a lot of the commentary in social media is of that, where people that felt they knew him, whether it was really well or not, every interaction they had with him was of that positive, high energy. It sounds like he inspired and helped a lot of people. He gave a lot.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people are like, whoa, we didn't know. And so when you say somebody can be exhibiting happiness in the way, let's say he was through his dance and all of his, life day to day, he at the same time, and maybe you're right, it's not him, but someone of that in a similar boat may also be experiencing darkness at the same time.
Yeah.
And that can be very difficult to comprehend for people that aren't there. Like, what can we say today? Do you have any suggestions on how to help people understand that actually is possible, and someone isn't crazy because you saw them 5 minutes ago and they gave you a hug and told you you were amazing and they loved you, and things were going good, because on one hand things are going good for them, but then at the same time take their life or share a deep dark secret that they're not well.
Yeah, my hope would be that people can check in with each other, right? Tune into what is going on and be able to ask like real, genuine questions. Sometimes, when it's just a how are you, we default to, we're good, everything's good. And I think it's really slowing it down again and being able to truly check in. Like, how are you actually doing? How are things going for you? This time can be stressful. Are there things that have been stressful for you? Right? It could be as simple as asking just like, what are some extra things that are going on? Because it gives you an idea of what the other person might be struggling with. And ultimately, of course, like, again, we have to take some initiative. The onus is on us to reach out and ask for some help when we need it.
Yeah.
But there are times where it seems impossible to be the person to reach out and ask for help. So really tuning in and checking in with each other is so, so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the sooner we can do that, or the more often we can do it, we can start to create like a comfortable dialogue. Because the first time that I check in with a loved one may not be them saying, this is how it is. But if they start to see this consistency and me telling them I'm thinking about them, or, sending them a message or something, it might eventually be a door opener. And it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't mean that as a person checking in, I'm solely responsible, that I'm missing something. I think what you're saying, the opposite, is just like, let's just build a level of awareness where we can be present in interactions and see how we're doing. And when we do check in with people, doing it genuinely, versus, and I think that might encourage those that are having a hard time saying something, maybe start to say, okay, yeah, this is rough and this is tough.
Yeah.
And I'm not being a Grinch. I'm being realistic, because I know that for me, I would really feel honored and very appreciative if a loved one told me that they were struggling.
Right.
And I hope, and I think there's a lot of us like that. There's a lot of us. I'm not the only, there's a lot of us out there that would say, thank God you told me this is a hard time. Let's figure out how to help you during this rough time. Maybe we won't host Christmas, or maybe we'll look at Christmas this other way or whatnot, because it really is a time to be together. And that can mean together through social, like a phone call. It can mean together through mailing something. It can mean together that I'm just going to think about you on this day, but I'm just not coming. Like, there's lots of different ways that we can show each other that we care about each other. And I think that being able to say something isn't going to ruin the day.
Absolutely. And maybe it starts with us sharing something with the other person to say, hey, my life also isn't perfect, right? And so maybe a part of that check-in starts with, oh, I just had a crappy, Monday because this and this and this, and I had a really hard time. How are you doing? How are things going for you?
Right.
It might be
Good
an
point.
opening of, here, I'll share something with you about how, if we're inviting others to share, we need to be able to share ourselves, right?
Very good point. That's right. Yeah. And that's right. Sometimes it's like, I don't know how to help, but that's a really good point. And well, we all know how we're doing. We are our best experts. So yeah, we can say, usually I enjoy this time of year. For some reason I'm not, or I'm wondering how it is for you. And, instead of being afraid, I think of, oh no, what if I say the wrong thing, or I upset you more or whatnot. And sometimes I think that's why we don't say something, because we think we're going to upset the situation even more so. And it's like, we don't have control over what the other person's going to say. If I'm asking you genuinely because I care, there's no way I'm going to screw up how I ask you.
Yeah.
And me personally, I can screw up a lot of conversations. I mean one thing and it comes out another. But I think, yeah.
You're coming in with good intentions.
always coming in with Bieber's good intentions. That's right.
Well, it's just being curious again, right? Like, we touched on this a little bit, the grief and loss. Like, there might be people going into this holiday season where this is the first time that they're celebrating holidays without the person who has always been there every single year. That can be so hard, because there's nothing that can prepare you for that.
Yeah.
You're just going to have to sit with some degree of sadness or pain, and a variety of different feelings, missing, right? Really experiencing grief. Does that mean that you're not allowed to have moments of joy during this holiday season? No, of course. I would hope that everyone can have times where they have those moments where they feel really good, where they feel positive. But if we're experiencing hurt and pain and grief during the season, that's okay too.
Right.
There is room for that.
Yeah.
We go into some of these family gatherings where we're asked a million questions about marriage and children and, what's happening with that, which can be really intrusive. It can be really intrusive, and it can be really painful for those who aren't there, who aren't, for whatever reason, whether they're not able to, whether they're not wanting to, be married or have kids or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Those are really sensitive topics. And I think people also need to be mindful of how we approach some of those conversations. Because as I say, be curious, also be mindful that some of those things are very intrusive and sometimes inappropriate.
Oh, totally. Like I'm just thinking about right now, I've started to do like these side episodes for this body image campaign that I'm doing. And one of the conversations I had recently with Stephanie, who was on the fertility one, she talked about some of her eating disorder struggles. And she said, like the holidays or events like these during the holidays were really hard because that is where she'd often hear from people, you've gained weight, you've lost weight, and so then you're restricting yourself in all sorts of ways, or you're binge eating in all sorts of ways because there's so much food and so much to eat around. And you even brought that up to me too about, this is an interesting time for people that with body image like issues, like the stress and struggle of getting dressed and what people put themselves through with that, let alone if there's restrictive or eating, people have many people's relationship with food is all sorts of things. And I'm one that can say that it's very difficult. Yeah. And so I think, oh my goodness, like I don't even think, we talk about that. Like I can't say that I've ever linked the holiday time to stress in that way. And even though I actually look forward to that event and getting dressed up, I'm not acknowledging that the amount of stress leading up to it. Like Carrie always says, before we host a party, like stay away. Like, why do we host a party? Because I go through this massive stress. I want to host it. I really want people to come. I want to give them the best time. But like you said at the beginning, it's unrealistic expectations I'm putting on mine. No one else is doing it. I'm doing it. And now I've worked myself up. And so it takes a lot to come back down after that.
Absolutely. And there's two things you mentioned there that are important. So I just want to touch on them. One of them is the body image. For sure, holidays, there is so much food around. We often, food is a part of our culture in many ways. And for most people, it's a way that we connect over food. We prepare food to show care, to show love for each other. And this can definitely also, the other part of it is that it can definitely trigger people's, body dysmorphia, their worries about their appearance. People who struggle with eating disorders, this can be a really, really hard time. So again, it's important to kind of be mindful of how are we approaching this issue. Certainly in my culture, food is such a big thing. And, I love food. And I get excited about this too. Yeah. But I'll be around my family members and they're always like, eat. Have you had this? Have you had this?
Right.
Have you had that? But at the same time, it's like, oh, you've gained some weight since last time, or you've lost some weight since last time. Like all of those comments also come with, and it's so funny, right? It's kind of ironic that food is such a big deal, but then then somebody will turn around and call you fat.
Totally.
With good intentions.
Totally.
Not appropriate. Yeah. So it's just such a tricky time, I would say, for people who struggle with disordered eating or eating disorders. Yeah. Definitely a hard time. And then the other thing you mentioned that I want to touch on is this idea of, being the perfect host and putting pressure on ourselves it's almost like this pressure to perform.
Yes.
Like we've put together, don't even get me started on, cleaning the house, preparing the meals, getting your family ready, getting your kids ready, getting in the right headspace, putting on the smiley, the smiles and the mood, get the Christmas music on or whatever that is. So many parts of that. And I feel like perfectionism thrives during the holidays. It's really, at its highest because we set all of these expectations for what is supposed to be happening. Including how we're supposed to be feeling.
Totally.
Which is why we're having this conversation.
No, that's well said. Because I think even the other side of it, like the host puts this pressure on, but then the guests that's part of the pressure probably I'm having an aha moment. The guests are feeling, the ones that are like reluctant to come because of their stuff, because they're like, oh my God, I'm going to go there and there's going to be all the Christmas music and the little Christmas napkins and the extra Christmas cheer. And meanwhile, the host is doing it because they think that's what their guests want. And the guests are like, oh, this is too much. Like, can we just order Chinese food and relax? Right. So it's funny because we think we're doing sometimes, and maybe it's not funny, but we're doing these things that we think people want.
Yeah.
And we're not asking. No. We're just assuming. Right. We're assuming that you're going to get me a gift, so I better get you one. And now it's not even coming from a place of care because I want to. No. It's, and so all these pressure. Totally. And then you can understand where these little micro communication issues come in, now like hosting. Okay. So what if people have their in-laws coming to stay with them? That can be stressful, and there's all sorts of dynamics that come out through that relationship or friends or family. So all these little micro communication errors come out and we don't talk about it when all we need to do And, it's simple, yet it's not to say, hey, this year, maybe the expectation can look this way. We're back to the 4 Christmases. Maybe this year we can we do one family a year or whatever it is, because you can't, you're just climbing this ladder, this endless ladder of unrealistic expectations. And
for sure,
that's overwhelming for someone that loves the holidays, let alone someone that's,
that struggles.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, and then you can even think about, if you're the one hosting this year and you're a person who does a wonderful job with decorating and gets really excited and gets into the holiday spirit, that guest, like what you had mentioned, somebody coming over, and if the expectation is that, maybe next year they're the ones hosting, is this what they're supposed to be living up to? Right. Yeah. Am I or last year I was at this holiday party and this year it's me.
Right.
Again, the pressure of like being the perfect host and making sure everything's just right.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not our responsibility to make sure everybody's having fun.
That's right. That's a good point.
What?
Why do we do that, right? Like we put how am I supposed to make you have a good time? I don't know how to do that. But if I show up being present and tell you where I'm at, whether that's at a good place or not, maybe that'll actually help our evening go a little bit better, because then we know what to expect from each other. So what are some things? I know we've been talking a little bit about awareness and understanding, and also recognizing that within and recognizing that in others. What are some other strategies or ideas that come to your mind that we can share today for folks out there listening?
Well, I think when it comes to whether it's family gatherings or friend holiday events or office parties, people have to remember that it's okay to say no. You need to be able to give yourself permission and say, no, I'm not able to come to this year. It's okay to do that. And if you don't want to say no, you're not able to say no, then think about what kind of boundaries you might have to be able to go there and still have a good time, and not, afterwards feel completely drained or feel that all the just that it's drained all of your social battery, all of your energy.
Yeah.
And so that might mean, little strategies at an event for somebody might be knowing that they have a place to go to and wherever they're visiting. Maybe they have an opportunity to step out and go for a walk if they need to go for a walk.
Right.
Maybe there's a safe person at this event for you that you can speak to, that you can let them know and say, hey, can we just go chat over there? Because, this uncle just made this comment and it's really upset me.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to talk to him about it, but can I talk to you about it? It could be that we're letting people know, I'm not comfortable to talk about this right now at the dinner table, or finding ways that we can redirect a conversation, maybe by asking a question or having some small little, sometimes it's like preparing sentences.
Like a little script.
Like a little script.
So if somebody's going to say, oh, that, like you said, that uncle's always going to ask, how come you're not married yet? Or when are those kids coming? Or maybe something a little bit deeper. I know that might be coming. So what are the things I'm worried about, and how can I write something out and prepare it so that, it helps me respond and manage that? Like, that's what you're saying. That's a great idea.
Absolutely. And that's going to alleviate some of the anxiety, right? It's going to hopefully lessen our anxiety to some extent, knowing that we have some answers prepared, we have some questions prepared, we have some exit strategies. Like, it might be as simple as, I'm going to just drive myself to this today so that I can leave whenever I want to leave, rather than having to wait for somebody else.
That's right.
Right? Like, I just don't want to be locked into a 4-hour dinner. I just want to be there for an hour and a half, and then I want to leave.
Good point.
And that's okay, right?
Yeah.
Like, we need to be able to, again, check in with ourselves, what it is that we need, and set those boundaries for that will serve us.
Yeah.
Like, we need those tools everywhere.
Yeah.
But in these particular situations where stress is kind of increased, where anxiety is increased, where maybe we're not feeling so good, we need those tools.
Totally. And I think it's helpful to think about these exit strategies and sort of like even these scripts, because we're also around a lot of substances during the holidays. So, sometimes drinking that eggnog or whatever it is, or, whatever substances we like to dabble in, we use those as a coping to get through. And sometimes that doesn't end up helping much. Like, alcohol is a suppressant. So if I'm already low and experiencing a low, dark time right now, and I'm going through some depression or have depression-like symptoms, and I'm drinking at today's holiday party, it can go a lot of different ways.
It's probably not going to help.
Yeah.
And 100% substance use increases around this time for a lot of people. Because if you think about it, even the culture around, like, let's say, if we just take drinking, attending office parties, it's very normal to actually go to an office party and have quite a bit of alcohol.
Yes.
It's kind of normalized in, I would say, Canadian, North American culture maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and other places in the world too. But you're actually expected to attend and have a glass of wine or have a little beverage as you're socializing and mingling with people who you might not even like that you work with, right?
Yeah.
And all kinds of things come out in at those parties too. But substance use, you're right. It's definitely something that can be concerning, and I think something we have to again pay attention to, because if we're engaging in more substance use around this time, that might be another sign that we're actually really having a hard time. That goes back to one of our first questions,
right?
That you might just be again checking out and avoiding how you're feeling by, maybe you're drinking a bit more, or you're using more cannabis, or you're using other substances, or maybe your prescription meds, you're actually just upping your dose and being your own doctor and taking some, right? All of those parts can definitely be some signs for us. And sometimes it almost seems like it's not intentional. So we really need to tune into it.
Yeah.
Like, do we recognize that, hey, I generally drink a couple drinks a week, but December, I'm just going couple
drinks a day,
right,
if not more.
Sure.
Yeah. And because we will say, oh, it's the holidays, come over for a Christmas drink or whatever, and so it gives us a reason to have more. But again, your question of like, to what cost? So I'm doing this because it's genuinely Christmas time and I love this eggnog, or I'm doing this because I don't want to deal with what might be coming up, or the person or the feelings that I'm experiencing right now.
Well, or this idea of like loosening up, like, oh, I'm going to let loose and have a few drinks so I can relax around my family and have a good time. But is it really going to help? Right? Or it's just important to think about. I mean, people will have drinks, and that's okay if you have a good, healthy relationship with alcohol, sure, no problem. But sometimes we get carried away around this time of year.
Yeah, in all sorts of ways. And that leads to, okay, this time of year, but we have like two parts to it, right? Like we have this holiday season coming up, and then we have post-holiday season. And I think sometimes we focus a lot on Christmas is coming and New Year's is coming and all the things about that. And then all of a sudden in November, you start seeing Valentine's things. But before Valentine's Day, we hit January, which sometimes people call them like the January blues and the post-holiday blues. And so let's talk a little bit about that. Like, what's that time like for people?
Well, you can imagine that after we've gone through this peak of, peak anxiety maybe for some, or all of these events that are finally done, our bodies might actually, and our minds, but our body experiences some sense of maybe relief. There might be some good things that come out of that. It's like relief, relaxing. You're like, okay, finally, all of this is done. I get to just chill out now. But for a lot of people, it can also bring up more feelings of sadness, feelings of loneliness. Maybe you've had a lot of family time and you felt really, really good. And now you're in January and you're feeling very alone. There's not things to look forward to, right? Like people that look forward to the holidays, now that those have passed, now what, right? So January can be an especially hard time. It's almost like coming off of this like high in emotions, right? And so it can be really hard. I think, depressive symptoms can certainly, again, worsen during this time. And then we have this idea around the New Year's resolutions that are such a prominent thing in our culture around, we are meant to set some goals for ourselves. We're meant to evolve and be better human beings than we were before. For some,
of course, fresh start.
And I want to just touch on the fact that, around the holiday time, we're reflecting on the year prior, and we might feel really bad about how we haven't accomplished our New Year's resolutions from the previous year or our goals for that year. And so there's that, and we might reset some of those. And I think it's important for people to consider whether those are realistic. And also necessary? Like,
Yeah.
are they necessary? Because I would want people to know that New Year's resolutions are not something that everybody needs to have, because we can just be good and happy with where we're at in life.
Yeah.
We do not need to be growing and evolving all the time, and setting our, constant goals
Right.
of like, can we just be okay with where we're at in life and celebrate and acknowledge what we have accomplished, what we already have? You can just be enough. You can just be enough.
Yeah.
You don't need a resolution.
I appreciate that. My New Year's resolution is to not have a New Year's resolution this year. No, because you're right. Like, this is where like the gym memberships go up. Right? The stats in January, because everyone's got this, a lot of people have the post holiday weight, and now they want to take that off. And I also think, January sometimes for some people is like dry January, because the holidays, we are, using more substances. People are maybe partying more. And so a lot of times you hear people do this dry January where they go cold turkey and they don't drink or use whatever substances they're going dry to. And I wonder, for some people, like, is that also where they're discovering that maybe that substance use was a bigger deal than just going cold turkey? And now you're going from, like you said, being on this high and let's say drinking lots to that completely coming out of your system. And I wonder if sometimes this is where people learn, like, maybe the drinking is a bigger problem than I'm letting on, because now I'm feeling very low and I don't have that substance there to give me that little pep in my step or numbing power or whatever. And I think that that's something that I would hope that we're all being responsible about when we're making those decisions. Like, what am I doing this dry thing for? And if I need to do that, like, what's that actually about? Is it?
Considering like that you might be experiencing withdrawals, you might again like feel effects, your sleep might be affected.
Right.
You might feel like increased fatigue. You might be waking up and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm never feeling rested. Like, I'm just exhausted all the time.
Yeah.
And again, that would be a reflection of your emotional state and where you're at. And January can be particularly kind of intense for that.
Yeah.
And again, a really important time for people to kind of check in with each other and to maintain some connection, because after the holidays, sometimes it's like we all just need a minute to recharge our social batteries, because they're just drained after so much togetherness. And so that's great, necessary, but can we also still leave some room to maintain a connection, to still check in, to not just completely be like, okay, now I'm going to go for weeks on end without, reaching out to my family because I just saw them and spent all this time and I don't have to. Well, somebody might have a particularly hard time after the holidays. And so it would still be important to just keep in touch.
Yeah. No, that's well said. So is there anything today that like I or you and I haven't touched on or talked about that maybe you want to go back and you want to bring up or you want to share?
Yeah, I guess another thing I would like to highlight is that sometimes when we're around family and engaging in traditions and rituals that we've done for a long time, we feel called to default to some previous roles that we've taken up, and whether it's in our childhood or, throughout our life. In kind of the earlier you had mentioned that family dynamic, when certain people are around, we tend to default to being a certain way.
Right.
And I want to mention that for some people, that also means that they're coming to these events having to pretend to be somebody they're not. If they're not accepted for who they are, how they are. I'm particularly thinking about, the LGBTQ2S plus community, people who maybe haven't come out to their family, people who haven't been able to express themselves freely and show up as their true self.
Yeah.
I think that again is just another example of why holidays can be really hard. Yeah. If we're pretending, pretending is exhausting.
Yeah.
And if we're having to kind of show up in a particular way and present a certain way, people need to understand that it takes a lot of energy and I would say, and resulting in mental drain, emotional drain. And so an expectation to attend, again, let's say 4 different holiday events or however many, it's just not possible for some people. And we need to have understanding for that and some patience, because it can be really difficult when you can't even come as yourself.
Yeah. I'm really glad you shared that point. Thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, I would hope that people can practice a little bit more kindness and patience and compassion, both for themselves and for others.
Right.
Because ultimately, if we are able to do that, I think we create space for connection, for true connection.
Yeah.
And isn't that what holidays are all about anyways? Isn't that what the most meaningful part of what the holiday season should be, right?
Absolutely. Whether it's a holiday season or just the life season, we as humans thrive when we have connection.
Yeah.
And we need one connection. I believe one person or one connection to help us, feel like we can dig ourselves out of that deep, dark hole we're in, or have a little bit more, energy to go through this, because I know that this support system is going to be there with me. But when we have more than one in a village, I think it makes, you're right, the holiday season or just times in life be more bearable and manageable, because it takes, sometimes, well, not sometimes, everything that you talked about today takes beyond one person to deal with. So if we have more understanding connection, then the people around us can help us deal with these difficult topics that, you're talking about today. So I'm really hoping that folks out there will be able to take in some of what we're saying today and apply it, and, hope that it's a continual thing, because it can be a lonely time. And you just said there's so many different ways that we can make it that it's not that. It's about connecting. So does anything else come up for you that because we had like as you see, we always have these notes and we have all these sorts of topics and things that are related to what we're saying. The list can go, and I think you and I even said, like, there's a lot of reasons. We've shared some of them. And at the end of the day, it's not so much of the reason. It's about the feeling. It's about the sensation. It's about the experience. So you don't have to justify to someone why you're feeling this way or what's bringing this experience up. What we're hoping is that you can just start with recognizing that there's this thing over here going on for you. And it needs a little compassion, like you said, and care. And then the rest, we'll get to step by step. But the first thing is, okay, can there be some compassion, recognition for yourself that this is a difficult time, whether it's during the holidays or after the holidays.
And that we have room for both the excitement and the joy that comes with this time, but also have room for the sadness and the anxiety that's bound to come up for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Or other difficult feelings that might come up during this time. We can experience both, right? It's this perspective that it has to just be this one way.
Right.
That's not the case. We're human beings. We're going to experience pain and suffering in life.
Yeah.
And so just being attuned to the human experience and having room for the hurt, for the grief, but also for moments of joy, that's just life.
Yeah, it is. And it's a good way to put it, that both don't cancel each other out. Both are just as important, and both require that acknowledgement that there's good things happening over here while there's not so good things happening over there.
Yeah.
And what does that mean to me? What do I do with that?
Yeah. So I guess my wish for the holidays for everybody is that they can take care of each other and be there for each other, show up in a way that you can, tune into your own feelings and see how you're doing, and have some, self-compassion, that it might not all be rainbows and butterflies. That's
rainbow. Have you been thinking about the metaphor?
We got through it.
When it's not all rainbows and butterflies. There you go. Look, full circle.
Full circle. And another thing I would encourage people to consider is the importance of having these uncomfortable and difficult conversations. Just because they're uncomfortable doesn't mean that, we always should be avoiding those hard conversations. They can actually be some incredibly powerful ways to do something different. When we're able to have a difficult conversation, to express our needs to somebody, or maybe to challenge their ideas around a social issue that's currently going on, because we might be, in a family environment talking about some different things. People hold different beliefs and values, ideas around political issues, social issues. You might have an opportunity to challenge some of that, to present a different perspective. And I think it's so important that we have uncomfortable conversations because it opens up space for an alternative idea, for an alternative outcome, and for change, for us to do something different. So, I hope people can just connect and be with each other. And I think that is what makes the biggest difference.
Very well said. You beat me to it. I was going to ask you if you had one thing you wanted to leave the guests with, and I think you did well. You beat me to it. So I think I'd like to go back and thank you again for coming on today. I really appreciated this conversation with you, and even for me, it was really beneficial to think of all the different causes behind people's hurt and people's energy. And while it's not up to me to fix it for everyone around me, it is my responsibility to start with myself and be in check with where am I at and what do I need. And I heard a lot today about how important it is to be honest with ourselves and with our loved ones. And I think if we can do that, maybe your wish can come true in having the kind of holiday season that would be more manageable to get through. So thank you
so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you did it. I can't wait to have you back. And so for everyone else, I always say these conversations are door openers. So if you have feedback, if you have further questions, or you want to reach out to Nevena, I will share her account info. You can also reach us at info@mfupodcast.com. You can also reach me on Instagram at MFU Podcast. So thank you, Nev, again for joining me. Thanks to everyone for listening. And we'll see y'all soon.